After 2 weeks of silence from my son Leo, I drove my old pickup across Pittsburgh, hoping to mend the fence we'd broken over money. The door to his rental was locked, so I took a look through the window. What I saw didn't just break an old steelworker's heart. It plunged me into a nightmare far colder than any winter night on the Allegheny River. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, each note echoing through the quiet house. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-finished cup of coffee beside me, trying to make sense of the new property tax bill. It was a peaceful afternoon in my little corner of Pittsburgh, the kind of quiet I'd grown used to since Carol passed. That peace was shattered by the sound of the back door flying open and slamming against the wall. Leo burst in like a storm front rolling off the Allegheny River. His designer jacket, the color of a stormy sky, was wrinkled, and his eyes were wide with a familiar, frantic energy. He didn't bother with a hello. "Dad, I need 15,000 now." His voice was tight, strained. He started pacing between the refrigerator and the sink, his expensive sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor Carol and I had installed 30 years ago. "This is it, Dad. The big one. A tech startup, guaranteed returns in 6 weeks. I can't miss this." I slowly took off my reading glasses and placed them on top of the tax bill. I looked at my son, 35 years old, wearing clothes that cost more than my entire monthly pension, yet standing there with the same desperate urgency he'd had at 17 when he wanted a new car. "You said the same thing last time, Leo." I kept my voice steady, the way a foreman talks when a beam isn't sitting right. "The 8,000 you swore you'd pay back in 2 months. What happened to that guaranteed return?" He waved a dismissive hand, nearly knocking over the salt shaker. "That was different. This is real. These guys are backed by serious people." I picked up my glasses and began cleaning them with the hem of my flannel shirt, a slow, deliberate motion. It was a habit I used to annoy Carol, and now it was a way to give myself a moment to think. "Son, my pension covers the mortgage and the bills, just barely. I'm not a bank." His pacing stopped. He planted his hands on the back of the empty chair across from me, his knuckles white. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching the sweat on his forehead. "Don't give me that," he hissed, his voice dropping. "I know what you and Mom saved up. I know it's sitting in this house somewhere. You're sitting on a pile of money, while I'm out here trying to build a future." The mention of the savings, our savings, felt like a punch to the gut. That money was for emergencies, for a world without me in it to take care of things. It wasn't for get-rich quick schemes. "What you call a future, your mother would have called a fantasy," I said, my own voice now hard as cold-rolled steel. "She would have told you to get a steady job, to earn your way like we did." "Don't you dare bring her into this," he roared, shoving the chair hard. It scraped violently across the floor. "She would have believed in me. She wouldn't be a stingy old man counting his pennies while his only son is drowning." The insult hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. He stood there, chest heaving, his face flushed red with a rage that seemed to burn away the boy I once knew, leaving a bitter, desperate stranger in his place. The slam of the back door was like a gunshot in the quiet house. It rattled the ceramic mugs hanging on their hooks and left a ringing silence in its wake. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, in the middle of my kitchen, the angry words still hanging in the air like bitter smoke. Stingy old man. My own son. Slowly, I bent down and picked up the kitchen chair he had shoved. I slid it back into its proper place at the table, the legs whispering against the linoleum. The house felt huge and empty. Every tick of the clock in the hall seemed unnaturally loud, marking time in a home suddenly devoid of warmth. My eyes drifted to the small framed photo of Carol on the counter. She was smiling, her eyes full of the life that had been stolen from us too soon. "You see, honey?" I whispered to the photograph. "You always said my love for him was too soft. You said one day he'd have to learn the hard way." Her voice echoed in my memory, as clear as if she were standing right beside me. "If you give him everything without effort, Walter, he'll never learn to value work." She'd been right, but knowing that didn't make the ache in my chest any less. The first few days were fueled by a stubborn anger. Let him cool off, I told myself. He'll call when he needs something again. He always does. I tried to go about my routine morning coffee, reading the paper, tidying up the garage. But my phone was a dead weight in my pocket. I'd pull it out every hour, then every 30 minutes, staring at the blank screen, hoping for a text, a missed call. Nothing. After a week, the anger began to curdle into a raw, gnawing worry. This was different from his usual silent treatments, which never lasted more than a few days. I found myself replaying our argument, wondering if I'd been too harsh. The image of his face, twisted with desperation, kept flashing in my mind. He was drowning, he'd said. What if he was really in some kind of trouble? By the start of the second week, a quiet dread had settled over me. It was a cold, heavy presence that followed me from room to room. I'd catch myself listening for the sound of his car in the driveway, my heart leaping at every engine that rumbled down the street. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound anymore. It was a thing, a living, breathing monster that fed on my worst fears. He was my son, my only child, and he had vanished. The anger was gone now, replaced entirely by a father's primal fear. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't just sit here in this silent house, waiting for a call that might never come. I couldn't just drive over to Leo's place. Not yet. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and self-doubt. I needed to anchor myself, to talk to someone who understood the world I came from. There was only one person for that. I found Gus at Rossi's diner, exactly where I knew he'd be. It was our spot, a small place tucked away on the south side that smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease, a haven for retired steelworkers like us. He was sitting in our usual booth, nursing a cup of coffee and reading the sports page. He looked up as I approached, and his easy smile faded the second he saw my face. "Walt," he said, his voice low and concerned as he folded his paper, "you look like you've seen a ghost." I slid into the worn vinyl seat opposite him. "Where's Gus? It's Leo." The waitress came over and I ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu. I didn't have the heart to tell her I probably wouldn't drink it. I told Gus everything. The argument, the demand for $15,000, the ugly words, and the 2 weeks of crushing silence that followed. I laid it all out on the table between the salt shaker and the sugar packets, the story of a father's fear. Gus listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was always a good listener. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee with a small metal spoon. "The kid's got himself in a bind again, huh?" he finally said. It wasn't a question. We'd had versions of this conversation about Leo for years. "This time feels different," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. The look in his eyes, it wasn't just entitlement. It was fear, real fear. And now this silence. What if he's in real trouble? What if he's hurt? Gus took a slow sip of his coffee. Or what if he's just trying to make you feel exactly what you're feeling right now so you'll crack and give him the money? His words were blunt, but they weren't unkind. It was the truth, forged in the heat of a steel mill friendship that didn't have time for nonsense. "You did the right thing, Walt," he continued, placing his cup down with a firm click. "You're his father, not his wallet. Carol would have said the same, and you know it. We worked 40 years in the mill, breathing in God knows what, so we could have a peaceful retirement, not to fund some kid's pipe dreams." Hearing him say it, hearing the echo of my own values in my friend's voice, cleared some of the fog in my head. He was right, but the fear for Leo's safety remained. "You're right," I said, meeting his gaze. "But I still have to know. I have to see for myself that he's okay." Gus nodded slowly, a look of understanding on his face. "Then you go. You go and see. A man's got to do what he's got to do for his kid." I finally picked up my coffee cup, the warmth a small comfort in my cold hands. The conversation hadn't solved my problem, but it had given me clarity. It had sharpened my fear into a single point of purpose. I knew what I had to do next. The drive to Leo's neighborhood was a short one, but it felt like crossing into another country. The neat lawns and sturdy brick houses of my part of town gave way to cracked sidewalks and rental properties with sagging porches. My old pickup truck rumbled over a pothole, and a fresh wave of worry washed over me. What was my son doing in a place like this? His rental was even worse up close. Weeds choked the small front yard, and paint peeled from the siding like sunburnt skin. A sad-looking lawnmower lay on its side near the steps, as if it had given up months ago. This wasn't just neglect, it was the home of someone who had lost all hope. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked to the front door. I knocked, the sound echoing hollowly. I waited, listening. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time, calling his name. Leo! It's Dad. Open up. The silence from inside was absolute. My heart sank. He wasn't here. But as I turned to leave, I heard it. A low murmur. Voices. Coming from the side of the house. I crept along the wall, my body tense. An overgrown hedge partially covered a grimy living room window. Staying low, I pressed my ear against the cold, damp glass. The voices were clearer now, 2 of them, and one was unmistakably Leo's. But it was a version of him I'd never heard before, cold, clipped, and completely devoid of emotion. Over this 3 times already, Rocco, Leo was saying. The timeline has to be perfect. Friday afternoons are ideal. He goes to the gym at 2 o'clock. Never misses it. My blood ran cold. My gym routine. Every Friday at 2, like clockwork. Who was Rocco? Why were they discussing my schedule? And the key? A second voice asked, calm and professional. Flower pot by the back door, Leo answered instantly. Same spot for 20 years. The old man's predictable. The old man. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. I crouched lower, my mind reeling as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. This wasn't a conversation about Leo being in trouble. This was something else. Something monstrous. The money's definitely there? Rocco's voice was sharp. Absolutely, Leo said, and the certainty in his voice was the sound of a knife twisting in my back. 43,000, maybe more. He doesn't trust banks. Keeps it all in the basement, under the loose floorboards near the furnace. I felt the world tilt on its axis. My legs trembled so violently I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. The money, our money. The money Carol and I had scrimped and saved for 3 decades. The money I had told Leo about in a moment of trust after his mother died, wanting him to know he would always be secure. He was describing its hiding place, our most intimate secret, to a criminal stranger. For a second, my lungs forgot how to work. All the air in Pittsburgh seemed to have vanished. Crouched there in the damp weeds, I was no longer a father worried about his son. I was a witness to a crime being plotted against me, and the conspirator was my own flesh and blood. My mind screamed, but I forced my body to move. My hands, clumsy with shock, fumbled for the phone in my pocket. My thumb trembled as I swiped across the screen, searching for the recording app. I managed to open it, my breath held tight in my chest, and held the phone steady against the wall. I needed proof. I needed to capture this poison so I could look at it later and know it was real. The voices continued inside, oblivious. Leo described my habits, my routines, the very rhythm of my life, all as weaknesses to be exploited. I recorded another 2 minutes of their cold, calculated planning before I couldn't take it anymore. I crept backward, away from the window, away from the sun I no longer recognized, each step feeling like I was wading through thick mud. The drive home was a silent movie. The familiar streets of my city looked alien, the faces of other drivers like masks. The only sound was the replay of Leo's voice in my head, a cruel echo chamber of betrayal, the old man's predictable. He had taken 35 years of love and trust and turned them into tactical advantages for a common thief. I stumbled into my own house, the door clicking shut behind me. The quiet that had once been peaceful now felt menacing. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a target. I collapsed into my chair at the kitchen table and, with a shaking finger, pressed play on the recording. I forced myself to listen to all of it, every single word. Hearing it again, in the safety of my own kitchen, didn't make it any less horrifying. It only cemented the nightmare into reality. A wave of grief, so powerful it almost knocked me over, washed through me. It was a grief for the little boy I'd taught to ride a bike, for the teenager I'd taught to drive, and for the man he would now never become. And then I looked up and saw Carol's photo on the counter. Her smile, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to ask a question. "What are you going to do, Walter?" I stared at her picture, and the grief began to recede, replaced by something else. Something hard and heavy, like the steel I used to shape with my own 2 hands for 40 years. I was not a victim. I had built this life, this home, with sweat and sacrifice. I had protected my family my entire life, and that job hadn't ended when Carol died. The tears that had threatened to fall dried up, and the shaking in my hands stopped. A cold, clear resolve settled in my bones. He had made his choice. Now I would make mine. Sleep did not come that night, but it wasn't the restless, worried sleep of the past 2 weeks. It was the sharp, focused wakefulness of a man with a job to do. Before the sun had even risen over the Pittsburgh skyline on Saturday morning, I was at my kitchen table. The coffee maker was humming, and my laptop was open. My son thought I was an old man, predictable, and stuck in the past. He was about to find out how wrong he was. I spent 3 hours researching. My hands, which had once expertly handled blueprints for steel frameworks, now navigated tech websites with the same precision. I wasn't looking for a simple doorbell camera. I needed a system. Wireless connectivity, motion-activated recording, high-definition video, and most importantly, secure cloud storage. They could steal my money, but they couldn't steal the evidence if it was already in the cloud. By 9 o'clock, I had my list. I got in my old pickup and drove to Best Buy. A young clerk with a bright, cheerful smile asked if I needed help. I showed him my list of specifications. His smile turned into a look of impressed surprise. "You've done your homework, sir," he said. "This 4-camera system right here will do everything you need." I paid in cash and was back in my garage by noon. I laid out the 4 small, sleek cameras on my workbench. They were miracles of modern technology, but the principle was the same as any job I'd ever done. Know your layout, choose the right tools, and execute with precision. I started with the back door, their planned point of entry. I mounted the first camera high in a corner of the kitchen, its magnetic base clinging firmly to a metal bracket I screwed into the wall. It was nearly invisible, but its wide-angle lens captured the entire room. Camera 2 went in the living room, angled to cover the hallway leading to the basement stairs. There would be no movement in my house that I wouldn't see. The third camera was for the basement stairs themselves. I placed it at the top, looking down. It would capture a clear shot of anyone descending into the heart of my home. The final camera was the most critical. I went down into the cool, musty darkness of the basement. I stood exactly where Rocco would stand. I looked at the loose floorboards near the furnace, the place where Carol and I had stored our future. Then I turned and found the perfect spot, a dark corner behind some old paint cans. I mounted the 4th camera, aimed directly at the hiding place. Back upstairs, I synced all 4 units to my smartphone. One by one, their green lights blinked on. My phone screen split into 4 perfect, crystal-clear quadrants, showing my quiet, empty house. I walked the path they would take from the back door, through the kitchen, down the stairs, to the furnace. I watched myself on the screen, a silent ghost moving through my own home. Everything was perfect. The technological part of the trap was set. On Sunday morning, I put on my best shirt, the one Carol always said made me look distinguished. This wasn't a job for a flannel shirt and work boots. This was a job for the law. With my phone fully charged and the audio file saved in 3 different places, I drove downtown to the Pittsburgh Police Headquarters. The building was a modern fortress of glass and steel, a world away from the brick and grit I was used to. But I wasn't intimidated. I was a man on a mission. I had an appointment with a Detective Miller. I'd called the non-emergency line the night before and given them the barest of details. Conspiracy to commit burglary, with audio evidence. They'd scheduled me for 10 a.m. She met me in a small, windowless interview room. She looked to be in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen too much. She was professional, courteous, but I could see the weariness in her posture. To her, I was probably just another messy family dispute. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, opening a notepad, "your call last night was unusual. Why don't you start from the beginning?" I didn't get emotional. I didn't raise my voice. I laid out the facts with the same methodical calm I'd used to install the cameras. I told her about Leo, the argument, the 2 weeks of silence, and what I had found at his apartment. She listened patiently, her pen scratching occasionally on the notepad. I could tell she was skeptical. So you're saying you overheard this, Mr. Blackwood? She asked, her tone carefully neutral. I did more than that, Detective, I said. I slid my phone across the table. I recorded it. I hit play. The cold, clear voices of my son and the man named Rocco filled the small, sterile room. I watched Detective Miller's face as she listened. Her professional mask didn't slip, but her eyes sharpened. She leaned forward, her pen starting to move more rapidly across the page. She listened to the entire recording without a word. When it was over, the silence in the room was heavy. "The voice you identify as your son's," she said finally. "You're 100% certain?" "I've been listening to that voice for 35 years, I said quietly. "I know it better than I know my own." She nodded, then looked at me with a new level of scrutiny. "And you've installed your own surveillance?" "4 cameras, wireless, cloud storage," I confirmed. I opened the app and showed her the 4 live feeds of my empty house. For the first time, her professional demeanor cracked. A flicker of something respect, maybe even awe, showed in her eyes. I wasn't the grieving, helpless victim she'd been expecting. She leaned back in her chair, studying me for a long moment. She closed her notepad. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice now carrying a different weight. "Your son and his associate are planning a felony. You have provided us with clear, actionable evidence. Tell me, how do you want to proceed?" "I want you to catch them in the act," I said, my voice steady and hard as iron. "I want them to walk into that house thinking they've won, and I want you to be waiting for them." Friday. The day had arrived with a quiet, gray sky that mirrored the cold knot in my stomach. The week had been a blur of silent preparation and brief, coded texts with Detective Miller. Now there was nothing left to do but play my part. At 1:45 p.m., I did a final check of the camera feeds on my phone. All 4 were active, streaming a clear, steady picture of my empty home. A text from Miller came through. "All units in position. Proceed as planned. Good luck." I took a deep, steadying breath. Luck had nothing to do with it. This was about precision. I moved through my house with deliberate slowness. I grabbed my worn gym bag from the closet. I put on the old windbreaker I always wore. I picked up my keys from the hook by the door, making sure they jingled just loud enough. Every action was a performance. I had to assume they were watching, waiting for any deviation from the routine my own son had so helpfully provided them. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but on the outside, I was just a retired steelworker heading to the gym. At exactly 2 o'clock, I backed my truck out of the driveway. I didn't look for the unmarked cars I knew were hidden on the surrounding streets. I just drove, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I passed Rossi's diner, but I didn't stop. I continued for another 2 blocks before making a wide, slow turn and coming back, parking in a spot across the street that gave me a discreet, distant view of my own block. I walked back to the diner. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. I slid into a booth in the back, one that faced the window but kept my hands below table level. The waitress smiled. "The usual, Walt?" "Just a black coffee today, Maria," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She brought the coffee, and I let it sit, its steam rising into the air. My hands were steady as I pulled out my phone and opened the surveillance app. The screen split into 4 silent scenes: my kitchen, my hallway, my basement stairs, and the dark corner where my life savings were hidden. Then I waited. Every minute that crawled by on the phone's clock felt like an hour. 2:10, 2:15. I watched a young couple walk their dog past my house. I watched a mail truck make its slow way down the street. The coffee grew cold. The diner buzzed with the low chatter of its afternoon regulars. 2:20. Had they changed their minds? A flicker of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced through my resolve. And then, at 2:23, my phone vibrated silently. A motion alert. My eyes snapped to the top left quadrant, the feed from the back door. A tall figure, clad in dark clothing, stepped into view. Rocco. He moved with a calm, predatory confidence, pulling a small tool from his pocket. The bait had been taken. My world shrank to the 4-inch screen in my hand. In the top left quadrant, Rocco worked on the back door lock with a terrifying efficiency. There was no fumbling, no wasted motion. He was a professional. Less than 30 seconds later, the lock clicked, and my door swung open. A stranger was in my kitchen. He paused for a moment, his head turning as he scanned the room, orienting himself with the layout my son had provided. He moved with a chilling lack of urgency, as if he belonged there. Watching him stand on the linoleum where Carol and I had danced while cooking dinner felt like a physical blow, a violation so profound it made my breath catch in my throat. He ignored the television in the corner, the laptop on the counter, everything of value. He was here for one thing only. He moved directly to the basement door, and my view switched to the second camera as he disappeared down the hallway. The third camera, the one aimed down the stairs, flickered to life with his movement. I watched him descend, each creak of the old wooden steps a familiar sound now made monstrous. He was in the heart of my home, moving deeper toward its most protected secret. Then, the final screen, the basement view, lit up. There he was. He moved past the old furnace, his eyes scanning the floor. He knelt down, pulling a small, flat crowbar from inside his jacket. I held my breath. The sound of splintering wood, faint through the phone's microphone, was like a crack running through my own heart. He pried up the floorboards I had laid myself decades ago. He reached into the dark space beneath and pulled out a plastic-wrapped bundle of cash. Then another, and another. He had found it. He was holding our life savings, 40 years of hard work, in his hands. The crime was happening, right now, in front of my eyes. My own hands were surprisingly steady. The hammering in my chest had subsided, replaced by an ice-cold calm. This was the moment. I swiped the screen, activating the discreet call to Detective Miller's direct line. It connected instantly, silently. I didn't need to speak loudly. I lifted the phone to my lips, my eyes never leaving the screen, watching Rocco stuff the last of the money into a backpack. "He has the money," I whispered, my voice low and clear. "He's holding our life savings. Move in. Now. Move in. Now." The words left my lips, and I watched the screen, my knuckles white from gripping the phone. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, my quiet home erupted in controlled chaos. On the basement camera feed, Rocco's head snapped up. His professional calm vanished, replaced by the feral look of a cornered animal. He heard it, the heavy thud of tactical boots on the floorboards above him. On the other screens I saw them, shadows in heavy vests, moving with silent, swift purpose through my kitchen down my hallway. The camera at the top of the stairs showed 2 officers descending, weapons drawn. My eyes darted back to the basement feed. Rocco scrambled to his feet, the backpack full of my money clutched in his hand. But it was too late. The door burst open. "Pittsburgh police, drop the bag. Hands where I can see them." The command was a roar that even the phone's tiny speaker couldn't contain. Rocco froze. He looked from the officers to the backpack, his mind clearly calculating odds he couldn't win. With a curse, he let the bag drop to the concrete floor. The sound of my life savings hitting the ground was dull and final. His hands went up in the air in a gesture of pure resignation. He was a professional, and he knew when the job was over. I watched as they cuffed him and led him up the stairs, his face a blank mask of defeat. A wave of profound, bone-deep relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me dizzy. It was over. The immediate threat was gone. My home was safe. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Miller. "Suspect is in custody, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice calm and professional. "Phase 1 complete. Your money is secure. We're clearing the house now. You can head back." She paused. "Stay sharp. Your son is due to arrive any minute for his pickup." I ended the call, my mind struggling to shift gears. I left a $10 bill on the table for the coffee I never touched and walked out of the diner into the cool afternoon air. The drive home, the same few blocks I had driven in a tense haze just minutes before, felt completely surreal. My street was bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of patrol cars, a sight so alien in our quiet neighborhood that it felt like a scene from a movie. I parked a block away and walked toward the controlled chaos. And then I saw it. A familiar blue sedan turning the corner. Leo. He was driving casually, probably anticipating a quick, clean pickup from his partner. He was driving straight into the web he had woven, completely unaware that the spider was already caught. Leo pulled his car to the curb, the confident ease in his movements visible even from a distance. He stepped out, a phone to his ear, probably ready to call Rocco and confirm the pickup. Then he looked up. I watched his entire body language shift in an instant. The casual swagger dissolved. His shoulders tensed. His face, illuminated by the flashing police lights, went from confusion to alarm, and then to raw, animal panic. He took a half step back toward his car, but it was too late. Detective Miller and a uniformed officer moved to intercept him, their movements calm and practiced. "Leo Blackwood?" Miller's voice was firm. "Yeah, but what's going on?" Leo stammered, his eyes darting from the officers to my house, to the patrol car where Rocco sat in stony silence. "My dad. Is he okay?" "Your father is fine," Miller said. "You, however, are under arrest for conspiracy to commit burglary." The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The reality of the situation finally hit him, and he began to struggle, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "What? No! This is a mistake! I was just coming to visit my dad! Dad!" His eyes found me then, standing on the porch, watching the scene unfold. The panic in his gaze was replaced by a flicker of desperate hope. He thought I was his savior. "Dad, tell them!" he shouted, his voice pleading. "Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them to let me go." I walked slowly down the porch steps, my boots making a soft, steady sound on the concrete. I stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see the tears welling in his eyes, close enough for him to see the complete absence of surprise in mine. The desperate hope on his face died, replaced by a horrifying understanding. "Dad?" he whispered, the single word hanging between us, full of a lifetime of questions. "How could you do this to me?" I looked at my son, this stranger in handcuffs who wore my family name. The anger was gone. The shock was gone. All that remained was a profound, aching sadness. "I didn't do this, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but carrying over the low hum of the police radios. "You did. You brought a criminal to this house. You laid out every secret of our home, of our lives, for him to violate. You planned to steal everything your mother and I worked our entire lives to build." I was desperate," he sobbed. "I was going to pay you back." "There are some debts you can never repay," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "You sold out your family. You sold out your mother's memory. You made your choice the moment you stood over those plans with that man." An officer gently guided him toward a second patrol car. Leo twisted, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. "But I'm your son." I took one last look at him. "Yes, you are," I said. "And a father's job is to teach his son the difference between right and wrong. This is your final lesson." I turned my back and walked toward my front door, not allowing myself to look back as the car door slammed shut, separating us forever. I didn't watch the patrol car disappear down the street. I closed my front door, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden, profound silence. The flashing lights were gone. The shouting was over. All that was left was me. My house was a mess, but a controlled one. Fingerprint dust coated the back doorknob, and the floorboards in the basement were still pried up. But it was my mess now. My house. Secure. I walked into the kitchen and methodically began to put things right. I wiped down the counter. I washed the cold coffee cup I'd left in the sink that morning. I tucked the kitchen chair back into its place, the same one Leo had shoved in anger what felt like a lifetime ago. The simple physical act of restoring order was grounding. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt a grief so deep it was like a physical weight on my shoulders. But underneath it, there was something else. A strange, quiet peace. The waiting was over. The lies were over. The storm had finally passed. And though it had left devastation in its wake, my foundation was still standing. The phone rang, and I flinched, expecting it to be Detective Miller with more questions. But the name on the screen was Gus. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Walt?" His voice was gruff with concern. "I saw the news crawl on TV. Are you all right?" News travels fast. "I'm okay, Gus," I said. my voice hoarse. Okay? Your kid gets hauled off in cuffs from your front yard and you're okay? He pressed. Tell me what happened. So I told him. I kept it brief, sticking to the facts. The cameras, the sting, the arrest. He was silent on the other end of the line, and for a moment I worried that he too would think I had gone too far. My God, Walt, he finally said, his voice full of a quiet awe. You did it. You actually did it. There was no judgment in his tone, only a deep, abiding respect. You did the hardest thing a father can do. You chose what was right over what was easy. Carol would have been so damn proud of you. Of hearing him say her name, hearing him validate the very thing that had driven me, made the weight on my shoulders feel a little lighter. I wasn't entirely alone in this. Thanks, Gus, I said, my throat tightening. That means a lot. You call me if you need anything, he said before hanging up. Anything at all. I stood in my quiet kitchen, the phone still in my hand. The conversation had been a lifeline. It was a reminder that the world of integrity, of hard work and honest friendship, still existed. It was the world I had fought to protect. I had lost a son today, but I had not lost myself. A few days later, I was sitting in my armchair reading the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and there it was, a small article buried on page 3 of the local section. Homeowner's tech foils burglary plot. It was a short, factual account of the arrests, mentioning a sophisticated home surveillance system and the quick work of the Pittsburgh PD. Seeing it there, in black and white, made it all undeniably real. My family's private tragedy had become a public record, a cautionary tale for the morning paper. The house was quiet. The rhythm of my life was slowly returning, but it was a new rhythm, marked by a deeper silence. The phone rang in the kitchen, and for a moment the old anxiety flared up, but I quickly quelled it. There were no more bad surprises left. It was Detective Miller. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice professional as always. I'm calling with an update on the case. I'm listening, Detective, I replied, my gaze drifting to Carol's photo. Rocco, the professional, didn't waste anyone's time. With his record and your evidence, he knew he was cooked. He took a plea bargain. He'll be going away for 3 to 5 years. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. And my son? There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. As a first-time offender, and with his lawyer arguing he was under duress, they're offering him a deal as well. 18 months in a state facility, with a chance of parole in 12. 18 months. The words landed like hammer blows. A year and a half of my son's life, gone. It was one thing to set a trap. It was another to hear the finality of the cage door swinging shut. A part of me, the father who had held him as a baby, ached with a pain I couldn't describe. I see, I managed to say. There's one more thing, Mr. Blackwood, she added gently. He's been asking to see you. Once he's processed, visiting can be arranged. He's remorseful. He wants to talk to you. This was it. The final test. The path of forgiveness, of fatherly compassion, was open to me. I could go to him, listen to his apologies, and perhaps begin the slow process of rebuilding. I thought of Carol. I thought of the 40 years we'd spent building a life based on integrity, and I thought of the cold, hard lesson that still needed to be learned. Detective, I said, my voice clear and steady. I appreciate you telling me. I appreciate everything you've done, but no. Sir? No, I repeated, my resolve hardening with each word. This is his path to walk now, alone. If I'm there to soften the blow, the lesson will never stick. He needs to face the consequences of his own choices, without me. After I hung up the phone with Detective Miller, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The decision settled not in my mind, but deep in my bones. It felt heavy and final and right. I felt a pull, a need to go to the place where it had all started and ended. I opened the door to the basement and slowly made my way down the creaking wooden stairs. The air was cool and smelled of damp concrete and history. The police had done their work, but I could still see the faint, angry scars on the floorboards near the furnace where Rocco's crowbar had pried them open. A physical reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. I didn't kneel down. I didn't need to lift the boards to know the money was there. Its value was no longer measured in dollars, but in the sacrifices it represented. Overtime shifts at the mill where the heat was so intense it felt like you were breathing fire. Carol working extra nights as a nurse, coming home exhausted but with a small triumphant smile. Birthday checks from relatives that we never cashed, but tucked away for a future we were building together, piece by piece. This money wasn't just my savings, it was our legacy. It was the physical manifestation of 40 years of love, partnership, and hard work. And Leo had treated it like an inconvenience, an obstacle between him and his next easy score. Standing there in the quiet dark, I felt Carol's presence more strongly than I had in years. I could almost hear her voice, calm and steady as always. "You did good, Walter. You did what was necessary." Was it the right thing? To turn your back on your only son when he's at his lowest? The father in me screamed no, but the husband who had made a vow to his wife, the man who believed that character is forged in fire, not given freely, knew it was the only way. The lesson had to be as real and as hard as the steel we used to make. It had to cost him something he couldn't just borrow or talk his way out of. It had to cost him his freedom. "I did it, honey," I whispered into the darkness, the words feeling sacred and true. "I protected what we built. I hope he learns from this. I hope one day he'll understand." A profound sense of peace settled over me. I had faced the ultimate test, not just as a homeowner protecting his property, but as a man defending his principles, as a husband honoring his wife's memory. I had done my final, most difficult duty as a father, and I was at peace with the price. I climbed the stairs from the basement for the last time, each step feeling lighter than the one before. The weight I had been carrying for weeks, for years, had finally been lifted. I walked back into my kitchen, where the morning sun was now streaming through the window, bathing the room in a warm, gentle light. I put on a fresh pot of coffee, the familiar aroma filling the house. The silence was no longer heavy or menacing. It was peaceful. It was the sound of my life, reclaimed. I sat at the kitchen table and picked up my smartphone one last time. I opened the surveillance app, and the 4 silent quadrants of my home looked back at me. They had been my eyes and ears, the tools of a painful but necessary war. They had served their purpose. With a steady finger, I went into the settings for each camera, and, one by one, powered them down. The screen for the back door went black. Then the hallway, the basement stairs, and finally, the corner that had guarded my legacy. The screens were all dark. It was over. I didn't know what the future held for Leo. Maybe a year and a half behind bars would give him the time to finally grow up, to understand the true cost of his choices. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe I had lost him forever. I had to accept that I couldn't control his path anymore. All I could control were my own choices, my own principles. I had chosen the hard road of integrity over the easy path of enablement, and that had made all the difference. I looked out the window and saw my neighbor watering her roses, just like any other day. The world kept turning. My life would go on. It would be a quieter life, perhaps a lonelier one, but it would be a life lived with a clear conscience, a life that Carol would have been proud of. I had protected our home, I had honored our work, and in the process, I had found a strength I never knew I had. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted rich and warm. The sun was climbing higher in the sky. Life is a series of choices, big and small, but sometimes a single choice can define who we are. For Walter, a man forged by the steel mills of Pittsburgh, that choice was between the easy love of an enabling father and the hard love of a man who refused to see his family's legacy squandered. He chose the difficult path, not out of anger, but out of a deep, abiding respect for the principles he and his wife, Carol, had built their lives upon. His story reminds us that true strength isn't just about what we build with our hands, but about the values we have the courage to defend, even when it means standing against our own flesh and blood. It teaches us that sometimes the most profound act of love is to let someone face the consequences of their actions, so they can finally learn to build something for themselves. The silence in Walter's home at the end of our story wasn't one of loneliness, but one of hard-won peace. It was the quiet of a conscience clear, of a duty fulfilled. He may have lost a son for a time, but he never lost himself. It's a powerful reminder that the foundations of integrity, once properly forged, can withstand any storm. If this story of a father's impossible choice touched your heart, please let us know by liking this video and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Walter's position? We read every comment and value your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that make you think and feel. Thank you for listening.